They thought the giant could never stumble. They thought the shadow of the eagle was too wide to be pierced. But history has always had its own rhythm, its own poetry. A single act, born of courage, born of vision, can shift the ground beneath empire. And so it was. India's one bold move that turned heads, silenced critics, and forced the mighty to bow before the power of dignity. They thought power was measured by the size of armies and the weight of gold. But they forgot that true power lies in the heart that refuses to bow. When India stood tall, the world was forced to look again, to rethink, to question what strength truly means. For decades the story was written by those who had the loudest voice, who carried the biggest stick, who believed dominance was destiny. But on that day, with that single decision, India showed that strength has another language, one that does not scream but resonates, one that does not oppress but inspires. It was not just a move against a policy or a command. It was a move against centuries of expectation that some nations must remain under the shadow of others. The beauty of standing tall is not in arrogance, but in dignity. India did not stand tall to shame others. It stood tall to honor itself. When the pressure was heavy, when whispers of doubt surrounded its leaders, the choice was not easy. To resist the demands of a superpower is to invite storms, to risk isolation, to gamble on the unknown. Yet India chose to rise, because the cost of bowing would have been heavier than any sanction or threat. And in that rising, a new standard was set. Nations around the globe watched with widened eyes, realizing that submission is not the only option, that courage can be a shield stronger than steel. There is a moment in every struggle when the choice defines not only the present but the future. That moment came when India chose to place dignity above dependence, sovereignty above subservience. It was as though the spirit of generations, those who had fought for freedom from chains, stood behind the decision, whispering, urging, demanding that India not fall back into the posture of obedience. The decision was not made in the comfort of certainty, it was made in the fire of conviction. And conviction, when fueled by truth, becomes an unbreakable fortress. What makes standing tall so transformative is the way it awakens others. When a nation once viewed as a follower rises to lead, it shifts the world's imagination. India's move became more than policy. It became poetry, an anthem of independence that traveled across borders. It spoke to nations that had long bent under pressure, reminding them that they too have the right to rise, that fear is not destiny, and that no voice, however powerful, can drown out the chorus of self-respect. It humiliated the U.S. not by insult, not by aggression, but by the sheer audacity of dignity. For nothing strips arrogance faster than being confronted by quiet, unwavering courage. To stand tall is to remind the world that equality is not granted by the powerful. It is claimed by the steadfast. India's refusal to kneel was not a rejection of partnership, but a rejection of control. It told the world, we can walk with you, but we will not walk behind you. That distinction, subtle yet seismic, reshaped the narrative. For the mighty are used to obedience, not to equals. They are used to dictating terms, not negotiating on level ground. By choosing to stand tall, India forced the world's most powerful nation to see it not as a subject, but as a sovereign. That humiliation was not in the loss of face, but in the loss of control, the realization that the old order was breaking. In that single act of standing tall, India reminded us all that dignity is not negotiable, sovereignty is not for sale, and respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned. It became a lesson to every individual and every nation. You are not defined by the size of your opposition, but by the depth of your conviction. And when conviction holds firm, even the mightiest must pause. Even the loudest must fall silent. Even the most powerful must learn humility. When storms rise, many seek the comfort of shelter, hoping to wait out the fury until the skies clear. But the brave, those who carry fire in their spirit, do not retreat. They step out into the rain and make the storm their stage. India's bold move was precisely that. A refusal to be cowed, a refusal to be drowned by threats or silenced by thunderous demands. When the United States attempted to direct the dance of nations, expecting all others to follow its rhythm. India chose to choreograph its own steps, and in doing so it humiliated the very power that believed itself untouchable. Defiance is not recklessness. It is vision wrapped in courage. For India to say no to the demands of the most dominant nation in the world was not a gesture of rebellion for rebellion's sake. It was an act of self-definition. In that moment, India declared to the globe, "We are not an echo, we are a voice. The rain may pour, the winds may howl, but we will not seek shelter in submission. Instead, we will let the storm cleanse us. Let it test us and let it reveal the strength we have long carried." That defiance transformed what could have been fear into fuel, what could have been retreat into triumph. The humiliation of the United States was not in words spoken or threats ignored. It was in the spectacle of a nation refusing to play the role assigned to it. Power expects obedience, and when obedience does not come, it falters. The dance India performed was not choreographed by Washington. It was improvised by sovereignty. Each step sent a message. We will not be dictated to. We will not be coerced. We will not be owned. And as the dance unfolded, the watching world saw not chaos but courage, not disobedience but dignity. True defiance is rooted in truth. It is not born from arrogance but from clarity of purpose. India's leaders knew the risks. They knew the isolation that could follow, the punishments that could be delivered, the weight of consequences that could crash down. But they also knew that surrender would mean something far heavier, the loss of identity, the erosion of self-respect. To avoid the storm would have been easy, but it would have meant walking forever in someone else's shadow. By choosing to step into the rain, India showed the world that storms do not break the brave. They reveal them. And so while the U.S. expected compliance, what it received was defiance cloaked in calmness. There were no insults, no shouts, no rage. Only a quiet, firm refusal to bend. That quietness stung louder than any confrontation could have. It was a reminder that power can command armies, but it cannot command dignity. It can impose sanctions, but it cannot erase pride. It can roar in anger, but it cannot silence a decision born of courage. This was the humiliation, not the defeat of force, but the defeat of presumption, the unraveling of an illusion that the world must always move to America's tune. The dance in the storm became a symbol, a beacon. Other nations looked and wondered, if India can resist, why can't we? If India can chart its own rhythm, why must we forever follow someone else's? Defiance breeds defiance, courage breeds courage. The storm that was meant to frighten India into submission became instead the storm that awakened others to their own strength. The dance spread across continents, carried not by weapons but by whispers, not by threats but by inspiration. In the end, the rain did not drench India into weakness, it washed it into clarity. The storm did not break India, it unveiled its resilience. And the defiance that humiliated the United States became not just a victory for one nation but a lesson for the world. When the storm comes, do not hide, do not cower, do not yield. Step into the rain, lift your chin, and let your courage create a rhythm so strong that even the mighty will be forced to listen. Courage, when displayed openly, has a way of igniting flames in the hearts of others. It does not stay contained. It spreads, it multiplies, it awakens the dormant strength of those who had long forgotten their power. When India made its bold move, it was not only an act of defiance for itself, but a spark for the watching world. The choice to resist, to stand alone if necessary, created ripples that traveled far beyond its borders. The echo of its courage crossed oceans, rattled halls of power, and unsettled those who had built their dominance on the assumption that no one would dare to say no. For years, the United States had grown accustomed to silence from its allies, accustomed to nodding heads and obedient signatures. It believed that pressure, whether economic or political, would always bend others to its will. But India's courage disrupted that script. In one decisive moment, the script was torn, and a new story began. Others who had watched quietly began to wonder if they too could resist, if they too could reclaim their voice. That is the contagious nature of courage. It makes others question why they have settled for submission, why they have accepted chains disguised as partnership. The humiliation for the US came not only from India's refusal, but from the example it set. It was no longer just about one nation choosing sovereignty, it was about many nations realizing they could choose the same. The eagle may have talons, but even talons cannot grasp a billion hearts that beat with defiance. India's courage was not loud, yet its silence carried more weight than speeches. It showed that a single choice, if rooted in conviction, can inspire millions and destabilize the comfort of empires. What makes courage so powerful is its honesty. It does not pretend, it does not deceive, it simply stands firm. India's decision was not hidden behind excuses or softened by apologies. It was clear, direct, unshaken. That clarity became its strength. The world saw a nation that was not trembling in fear, but rising in determination. And that image spoke louder than any threats from Washington. Courage, after all, is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear dictate the path. In choosing sovereignty over submission, India revealed that courage is a language understood in every corner of the earth. And courage, once seen, cannot be unseen. It lingers in the minds of those who witnessed it. Leaders in faraway capitals began to feel the stirrings of possibility. Citizens in distant nations began to whisper about dignity and independence. India's action was not isolated. It was a spark in a forest of dry wood, waiting for a flame. The humiliation of the United States was compounded by this realization, that its dominance was not slipping because of weapons or wealth, but because of the example of courage. No amount of force can erase the image of a nation standing tall, unbent, unbroken. The spread of courage is often more dangerous to empires than the spread of war. Armies can be defeated, weapons can be destroyed, but ideas cannot be contained once they are born. India's courage was not just a shield for itself. It became a mirror that forced others to look at their own chains. And in that reflection many saw what they had been too afraid to admit, that submission is a choice, not a destiny. Courage showed them that another choice was possible. This is the true power of India's act. It became more than defiance. It became inspiration. It humiliated the United States not only because it faced resistance, but because it could not stop the spread of that resistance. The echo of courage traveled far, shaking the foundations of assumptions, loosening the grip of fear, and opening doors that had long been locked. India's choice became not just its own victory, but a call to the world. If one nation can stand, so can another, and another, until the mighty find themselves humbled, not by one voice but by a chorus of many. Humility has often been mistaken as a trait of the weak, as if to bow one's head is to admit defeat. But true humility does not belong to the powerless. It is forced upon those who wear false crowns, those who have built thrones on the presumption that others will never dare to challenge them. When India chose sovereignty over submission, it did more than make a political decision. It placed a mirror before the United States. And in that mirror the US was forced to confront a truth it had long denied. Arrogance cannot last forever, when faced with courage that refuses to bend. For decades, America had stood as the orchestrator of world affairs. Accustomed to obedience, dressed as diplomacy, it expected deference, not defiance. It assumed its power so absolute that no nation would dare to resist. Yet in one stroke, India shattered that illusion. The humiliation was not in words exchanged across negotiating tables, but in the quiet firmness with which India stood its ground. The image of a nation, often underestimated, refusing to follow instructions, bruised the pride of a superpower that had grown too comfortable in control. There is a weight to dignity that no empire can crush. India's stance revealed this truth. To the world it seemed as if David had stood once again before Goliath, not with a weapon but with a will so unyielding that even giants trembled. The United States, so used to shaping outcomes, suddenly found itself confronted by something it could not manipulate. The sheer resolve of a people unwilling to trade their sovereignty for promises or threats. That moment of confrontation forced humility, for arrogance is always humbled when it meets a wall it cannot climb. And the humiliation was deeper because India did not posture with aggression. There was no display of fury, no rhetoric meant to wound. There was only refusal, calm and steady. That quietness pierced sharper than any shout. For it showed that India was not acting in haste or emotion. It was acting from a place of certainty. To stand firm without rage is to show the world that your decision is rooted, not in rebellion but in conviction. This was the wound to America's pride. It was not beaten by hostility but by serenity. And serenity, when unmovable, becomes the most humiliating force of all. The lesson the United States was forced to learn is one that every empire eventually faces. Power is not permanent, and obedience is not guaranteed. To assume control over others forever is to ignore the inevitability of awakening. India's move revealed that awakening, and it was painful for the mighty to accept. For centuries the narrative had been that smaller nations must play by the rules written elsewhere. India tore that narrative apart, showing that equality is not a gift handed down, but a truth that must be claimed. And once claimed, no power can strip it away. What made this moment historic was not simply the political ripples it created, but the psychological ones. Across the globe, nations watched as the United States, the self-proclaimed leader of the world, was forced to taste humility. They saw that control could be resisted, that sovereignty could be defended, that arrogance could be humbled. India's actions spoke not just to governments, but to peoples, awakening the spirit of independence in places where silence had reigned too long. The humiliation of the United States was not the end of its power, but it was the cracking of an illusion. And illusions, once broken, cannot be rebuilt. The crown America wore slipped slightly that day, not because of violence or war, but because of the courage of another nation. India reminded the world that respect cannot be demanded, it must be earned. And when it is not, even the mighty will be brought low. That is the kind of humility that reshapes history, the kind that transforms the stage of world affairs forever. Destiny has always favored those who dare to step beyond fear, those who are willing to risk comfort for the sake of principle. India's bold move was not just an act of resistance, it was a declaration to the future. It said to the world, with unshakable certainty, that India would not remain a pawn on the chessboard of global power, but would rise as a player in its own right. It was a decision that reached far beyond the present moment, carving a path that pointed toward sovereignty, dignity and leadership. For destiny does not wait for the hesitant. It walks alongside the bold. This act was not about defiance for its own sake. It was about vision, the vision of a nation that knew its worth, a people that remembered their history, and a leadership that understood the weight of legacy. India chose not to bend, not because it sought to humiliate, but because it sought to define. It declared that its place in the world would not be given, it would be claimed. The United States, with all its might, was forced to witness this, and in doing so tasted the bitter lesson that control is temporary, but dignity is eternal. The humiliation came not from defeat in battle, but from the realization that India had moved beyond the role others had written for it. Destiny is a river, and those who hesitate are swept away by its current. Those who act boldly, however, redirect its flow. India's choice did precisely that. What had seemed fixed, alliances, dependencies, hierarchies, suddenly shifted. The world saw that the current could be altered, that the flow of history could bend toward a different horizon. This act of courage did not just reshape India's future, it reshaped the future of global politics. For when one nation rises, it gives courage to others to follow, and the river grows wider, stronger, unstoppable. The United States, so long accustomed to being the architect of destiny, had to face a new reality. It could no longer dictate the path of every nation. India's decision to claim its sovereignty was a reminder that destiny cannot be written by outsiders. It must be written from within. That was the humiliation, to see that a country once viewed as secondary was now leading with conviction. The arrogance of assuming perpetual control was pierced by the sharp truth that no empire lasts forever, and no power can command the will of the determined. India's boldness carried a message deeper than politics. It was a spiritual reminder to all who watched that freedom is not given. It is taken. It does not come wrapped in treaties or agreements. It comes in the choices we make when pressure is at its highest. India's refusal to yield was not only a victory of the present, it was a seed planted for generations to come. A seed that would grow into the unshakable belief that destiny belongs, not to those who threaten, but to those who endure, not to those who command, but to those who claim. And so this bold move became more than a decision. It became a symbol. It told the world we are not fragile, we are not dependent, we are not to be commanded. We are sovereign, and we will walk into tomorrow on our own terms. In that proclamation, India humiliated the United States not through insult or hostility, but through the undeniable force of self-respect. For destiny bows to no empire. It bends only toward those who have the courage to claim it. India claimed it that day, and in doing so reminded all of humanity that boldness is the compass by which the future is charted.